Right, so this is paper session D. We'll have one in-person presentation and then we'll have a presenter online as well. Two exciting presentations. The first is on female labor force participation. So Farah Imami, who's an MPhil student at Lahore School of Economics, is going to talk about intra-household information sharing and female labor force participation. She'll present a case of Pakistan.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farah, and yeah, 20 minutes. And I'll be presenting the preliminary findings of my MPhil thesis titled Intra-Household Information Sharing and Female Labor Force Participation, a Case of Pakistan. So right now, this study is still ongoing, so any and all comments would be greatly appreciated. So to start off with, here we can see that there are significant regional differences in the female labor force participation rates. So in particular, women in South Asian countries are less economically active than those in other regions. If we focus on Pakistan, although women make up nearly half of the population, only 24% of them are part of the workforce. And this is significantly below the global average of 49%. And it's also below the South Asian average of 28%. So it's important to understand, why is this the case then? So, low levels of female labor force participation rates can be attributed to a variety of different factors, ranging from gendered expectations and cultural norms to more practical barriers such as lack of mobility and limited access to employment opportunities and resources. So, what my paper is proposing is that one of the main reasons for this low rate is that there are significant information asymmetries between men and women about the labor force market. And essentially, these information asymmetries are much stronger in developing countries such as Pakistan because women have smaller, inferior, and less diverse networks than men. And essentially, little is known about how information is then shared within a household. So, what we're proposing is that the male household head could bridge this gap and provide work related information to the woman in his household, which will then increase their awareness of the labor force market. Awareness of jobs and knowledge of how to access them has actually been found to increase employment opportunities for women. And providing accurate information has been found to, about the labor market cuts the gender gap by one half. So for my paper, the main research question is, does information sharing within households affect female labor force participation? While recent studies have looked at the impact of information flows between spouses on their expectations and decision making, the literature does not explicitly test for the impact on female labor force participation. And the second question that we're going to look at is, are the types of information, and here we're talking about negative or positive statements, are they more likely to encourage or discourage women from participating in the labor force? And here, what we're thinking is that, we're looking at how the male household head acts as a gatekeeper and essentially filters the information that he would share with the woman in his household. So, just a brief preview of our findings. We do find that there are significant differences in job and work related information between men and women. Never sharing job related information in a household is associated with 15% lower jobs and 15% lower labor force participation. On the other hand, sharing job related information or discussing it frequently, meaning on a daily basis, that has been found that's associated with an 18% higher job search and 20% higher labor force participation. And these associations are relatively stronger when a woman in the household is sharing this job related information. So, in that case, we find that women, if they never share job related information, that's associated with 20% lower job search as well as labor force participation. And on the other hand, if women share this information frequently, then that is associated with 22% higher job search and 24% higher labor force participation. So for this study, we're looking at 200 census blocks that are in close vicinity And here, the definition of close vicinity is less than 30 minutes away from apparel manufacturing firms in three different cities of Pakistan. We're looking at Lahore, Faisalabad, and Sialkot. And so, from each of these census blocks, a random sample of 20 households is surveyed. And from each household, we're going to survey one household head and one target woman that is aged between 16 to 45 years. So my particular paper is going to focus on a sub-sample of these households that are only headed by a male, and our projected number of observations is around 3,000. So like I mentioned, the data is still coming in. We're still collecting it. Recently, we also had adverse weather conditions that has delayed this process of data collection. So the data comes from the baseline survey of an RCT called Managers and Households Attitudes Towards Women Working in Factories, Role Model Firms, and Information Interventions in Pakistan, and it's funded by PEDAL. So here we're just looking at our sample visually. Here, the red area shows the province of Punjab, and within Punjab, the three cities that I mentioned are highlighted here in green. Looking at our sample characteristics, we find that on average, a household has 7 members, and the average monthly income for that household is 59,000 rupees. If we see the sample of our target male and female, then the males are on average older than the females, and they also make 3 times more monthly income than the females do. So just to get a better understanding of the target female of our sample, so here around 63% of the women in our sample are the wives of the male household head, 15% of them are their daughters, and 16% of them are their daughter-in-laws. So moving on to our descriptive statistics. Now here, we essentially asked our sample what do they know about the working conditions in a typical garment factory, right? And so the working conditions include information on the type of positions that are offered, the length of their shift, the commute costs, the time of commute. And so here we're looking at the share of men and women that don't know this information, right? And this orange bar essentially shows the share of women that don't know, and we can see that is significantly higher than the information about the working conditions that men know. So what we're saying is that there are differences in information that both men and women possess, and we're saying that women are, on average, less informed about the working conditions than men. Similarly, we also asked them what they think the average working condition is in a typical garment factory. And so when we're looking at this, we do find that, again, there are differences in information between men and women. So women, on average, expect higher levels of education. They expect a higher cost of commute, as well as a higher cost of the job application. We also asked them about which amenity they think is provided in a typical garment factory. So now this is the share that do know this amenity is provided. And again, we're here we can see that women are less informed than men are. So just a brief look at our sample here. In our sample, 34% of the women have searched for a job previously, 18% of them are currently working, and 13% of them have worked in the past. Coming towards the empirical estimation, so this is the model that we're running. So in this baseline model, we run the community fixed effects, and the standard errors are clustered at the household level. So A dependent variable, which is female labor force participation, it's measured either if the woman has ever searched, if she is currently working, if she has ever worked, or if she is currently working slash ever worked for a job outside the home for wage or income. And our main independent variable here, which is the information flow variable, it's constructed as follows. So we're looking at four different things. Where first, we're looking at when job-related information is never shared. Second, we're looking at if job-related information is shared frequently, meaning daily. Third, we're looking at women never sharing job related information. And fourth, we're looking at women sharing job related information frequently in a household. So, since households that have a woman which is already working, they would have better discussions or better information flows about job related information. The estimation strategy that I proposed above, that might suffer from endogeneity bias due to the reverse causality. So to address this bias, we will use an instrumental variable. So the household-based IV that we were thinking of using is the presence of the male household head's father during childhood. And the thinking behind this is that men raised in households with absent fathers will have different communication norms than those raised in households with the present father, and that these men may be more inclined to share this job related information with the woman in their household, since they would have a closer bond with their own mother. We're also exploring other IVs as well. So these are more community based. So the first that we're looking at is planned electricity outages. And here the thinking is that outages would essentially reduce the availability and timeliness of the information at the household as well as the community level. And the other IV that we will be looking at is fiber optic or mobile coverage networks. And again, here the thinking is that better coverage would lead to greater access to information. So coming towards our results here. So the first set of results is for the case where job information is never shared. So in this case, women are less likely to have searched and participated in the workforce. If we look at the exact numbers, then never sharing job related information is associated with 15% lower job search and 15% lower labor force participation. When we used our IV, which was the male household head's father being absent during their childhood, we do not find any significant results. But since the data is still being collected, what we're hoping for is that this is underpowered. And once we have the full sample size, then this might become significant. The second set of results is on the case where job information is shared frequently. In this case, women are more likely to have searched and participate in the labor force. So, frequently discussing job related information is associated with 18% higher job search and 20% higher labor force participation. Again, once we ran the IV, we did not find significant results, but we're hoping that with the full sample size, we might. Our third set of results is the case where job information is never shared by women. And here, women are less likely to have searched for work or participated in the labor force. Women never sharing job related information is associated with 20% lower job search and 20% lower labor force participation. Here we do find that the IV results are significant. So women never sharing job related information now is associated with 21% lower job search and 21% lower labor force participation. Our fourth set of results, which is the case that job information is shared by women frequently. So here, women are more likely to have searched for work and participate in the labor force. Women sharing job related information frequently is associated with 22% higher job search and 24% higher labor force participation. Here, once we incorporate the IV, then women sharing job related information frequently is associated with 24% higher job search and 26% higher labor force participation. So for the second set of research question that we had, that was on the type of information, this is the model that we're running essentially. And again, we're using community fixed effects with standard errors clustered at the household level. Just like before, our female labor force participation measure is constructed in 4 different ways. If they have ever searched for a job, if they're currently working, if they have worked in the past, or if a combination of both, which is our labor force participation variable. When it comes to our independent variable, right? So here the male household head is asked how likely he is to share each statement with the woman in his household. So first, if we're looking at the first set of equation, which was with the positive information, so this is an index which is equal to 1 if any of these three statements is shared. So the phrasing is, how likely are you to share with the woman in your household that a family in your village where the wife's successful career has led to financial stability? The second is, a woman received a promotion at your workplace. And the third is, a new job opportunity opens up at your workplace that is suitable for women. Similarly, for the negative info, again, this is an index which will equal to 1 if any of the following three statements is shared. So the first is, how likely are you to share with the woman in your household that a woman at your workplace reports being harassed? The second is, a working woman in your village that is past the suitable age for marriage and still isn't married. And then the third is, a woman in your village that is struggling to balance her job with her basic household duties. So the findings for these, we don't find that the results are significant. So what we're saying is that the type of information that is shared is not associated with either job search or labor force participation. So in conclusion, we do find that there are significant differences in job and working related information between men and women. Never sharing job related information is associated with 15% lower job search and labor force participation. Sharing job related information frequently is associated with 18% higher job search and 20% higher labor force participation. Women, if they never share job related information, then that is associated with 20% lower job search and labor force participation. And lastly, women frequently discussing job related information is associated with 22% higher job search and 24% higher labor force participation. So that's it from my side. Thank you so much and looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Farah. So we have about 13 minutes.
I'm sorry if I missed this. I'm just trying to understand when you say that you defined it as. So you did two comparisons, right? Like women who share, always share on a daily basis.
Yeah.
What is that being compared to? Women who never share plus women who share sometimes? I was a bit confused why you split those two regressions. And then second, in terms of your IV, I think I would be a bit careful about, when a missing father, like if they're outside the country or in another city, that's likely to be endogenous, and that will mean that their childhood, in the sense that the facilities they have available, access to education, etc., are also going to be different. So I struggle a bit to think of it as something that's just uncorrelated with their choice of partners and so on. So yeah,
That makes sense. Yes.
So this is just a clarifying question. When you said that you're restricting your sample to male-headed households in the beginning, and the idea is that you're seeing if they're gatekeeping information, but then later you also talk about women sharing the information. So from each household, are we getting a male household head and then a woman, or are we also getting, like a female head, and are we looking at that? I think that sort of needs a bit of clarification.
Okay, I'll clarify that. Are there any other questions?
So it could be the case that the male-headed household has more income because an extra person is earning extra income, and they may have an extra effect on the availability of information. For example, access to the mobile, access to the internet, or other information technology. So I was wondering that how a male-headed household get keeping the information.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So the way we're making that variable about never sharing job information, right? So firstly, we're asking how often do you and the woman in your household discuss job-related information? So that started off with the five scale, Likert scale, where they have five options, right? So it's ranging from never to daily, right? So then we're only taking those answers where they said that they never share it, and we're coding that as essentially as just separately. So in that case, what we're saying is the variable is that they never shared, or and then zero otherwise, basically. And then we're taking the ones where they answered that they do share job information related information daily, and we're coding that separately out of that five Likert scale question. The IV, yes, we do know that there needs to be, that's why we're just proposing this, and this isn't finalized, and that is one of the main concerns of this study, what IV we're going to use. And you're absolutely right that, that would be endogenous, which is why then we are going to look at the electricity outages or the mobile phone coverage or the fiber optic coverage networks, just to reduce, just to eliminate that endogeneity bias. But we will do that once the entire sample is collected, essentially. So this is just like a work in progress. So thank you for that comment. About the male household head gatekeeping information, right? And then I was saying that women are sharing. So these questions are only being asked to the male household head. We are not asking these questions to the women. And the phrasing of that particular question is, how often do the women in your household share job related information with you? So we're saying that how often do the women share this with the male household head? So we're not asking this question to the females at all. All of these questions are only being asked to the male household heads, and then we're seeing how that impacts the labor force participation of the women. When it comes to access to mobiles and information, essentially, so our sample, majority of it are low-income households where they're probably owning one or two mobile phones, and in a majority of these cases, it's the male household head that owns the mobile. So in that case, we're saying that then they have more access to information, or that the woman do not have as much access, because the male, essentially, because that's his property, he would decide if he's sharing that mobile with his wife or with his daughter, essentially. So that's where we're saying that access to information is limited. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Interesting paper. So I was wondering if you could clarify a bit about your second research question where you're offering
Yeah.
positive versus negative information. I'm wondering, is this cross-randomized that some households receive, like you administer that negative information and for others positive, or for each household you have both positive and negative information? And if you do you have do you think about order effects? I mean, whether positive is given first and then negative, or negative given first versus positive. So just a bit of clarification on that.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. So if I summarize your results, essentially information, whether exchanged from a woman to a man or a man to a woman, is giving you positive results on female labor force participation and job search. So I'm just wondering, is this sharing of information capturing some underlying norm around openness to women working? And do you have data, any data on social norms that, perhaps you could see correlations with this information flow? Because it seems like maybe in these households, there's just an openness to women working, and maybe the norms there are different. So yeah, just more of a comment than a question, I guess.
Okay, I had the same comment, but just to add, not just the social norms to openness, I would also say something about the need to work. So are these households where the women are trying to convince their husbands, look, I need to work because I need to supplement the income, or vice versa? So maybe presumably you should have some information on that already from the surveys that you're conducting, and so you could tease that out.
Okay, so first to start off with Dr. Hamna's question about the second research question. So we are asking both sets of information, positive and negative, to all the households. So we're not filtering it out, we're not doing that. And you are quite right about the ordering, and we should look into that because I do believe we're asking them all the positive statements first and then all the negative. So maybe in the rest of the sample, we should look into how the order might impact their answers. As for the results capturing underlying social norms, that is quite true. And we do have an entire module on social norms. So I will incorporate that. That is a very good suggestion. Thank you to you both for that. Is that it?
Sorry. Well, firstly, thank you for presenting. I would have never dared to present my master thesis anywhere, so that's very impressive already. I have a question about the sort of the interpretation of a woman sharing her experiences at work effect on actually working. If I'm not working, I don't have any experiences to share. So I don't think a causal claim can be made between a woman sharing work experiences on actual work behavior, even with an IV. So I think you want to be careful with that.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. As of right now, our question is not saying that she's sharing her own work-related experience. It's just saying, do they generally discuss jobs? So this might be even the male household head job, or just generally at the neighborhood level that, oh, I heard this position is opened, or oh, I heard my friend and her husband is working there. So it's just encompassing any job related information. So it's not just focusing on her work experience. Thank you.
Right, so we now have our online presentation. So Rikhia Bhukta is here, and she's presenting Signing for Safety Can Mandatory Marriage Registration Reduce Domestic Violence. So Rikhia, you'll have 20 minutes, and I'll hold up the 10-minute sign when you have 10 minutes left. So maybe you'll be able to see me, and you can then pace yourself accordingly. Over to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Rikhia, and I'm a fifth year PhD student at IIT Kanpur, and the paper that I'm going to present today, it's a part of my thesis work. So the paper is titled as Signing for Safety, Can Mandatory Marriage Registration Reduce Domestic Violence? Now, it's a well-known fact that the number of incidents of domestic violence all across the globe are still alarmingly high, right? One common estimate that is cited very frequently is that 1 in every 3 women, they sort of experience domestic violence at least once during their lifetime. Now, domestic violence not only has direct impacts on women's mental and physical health, but also adverse intergenerational impacts on the children's health, cognitive development, and school attendance. Now, in developing countries like India or Pakistan, this problem becomes more acute with pre-existing patriarchal norms and social taboos related to the reporting of domestic violence. If you look at the data, South Asia has the highest prevalence of domestic violence, which stands at around 40%. If we look specifically at India, which is the main context of the study, the number is at around 30 to 33% as per the most recent round of National Family Health Survey, where they record individual level experiences of domestic violence. So therefore, it is important to understand which policies can mitigate domestic violence and how. There are papers that study the role of divorce and separation laws, mainly in the context of the United States, and also the impacts of cash transfer policies, financial inclusion, and also stricter punishment measures. In this paper, we focus on a particular policy, which was a mandatory marriage registration policy. And we try to understand how this policy can reduce domestic violence. We contribute to three strands of literature broadly. The first strand of literature is the one that talks about different socioeconomic causes of domestic violence, such as unemployment, socio-cultural norms, female political participation, women's education, health, etc. In this paper, we sort of identify a novel determinant of domestic violence, which is the lack of legal documentation of marriage. Secondly, we contribute to the broader literature that tries to understand the role of institutions, such as its impact on economic development, poverty reduction, inequality mitigation, etc. Here, we focus on how institutional changes can influence social norms or gender norms related to violence against women. And thirdly, and I'll explain this point more in a later stage, we try to understand how corruption in the public service delivery system can limit the effectiveness of public policy interventions. Now, let me talk about the process of marriage registration in India and how it can potentially impact domestic violence. To register a marriage in India, the bride and groom, they need to go to the registration office, where they first check all the relevant documents, such as age proof, whether or not the bride and groom, they have reached legal age of marriage. Then they check sort of different identification documents, such as Aadhaar, which is the national ID proof for India, and some other documents. And then the couple put their signatures in a form along with three other witnesses. And finally, the registration officer, he or she uploads all the details in a particular dedicated portal and issues a marriage certificate, which is the legally identified proof of marriage. Now we have identified two main channels through which this whole process can reduce domestic violence. First one is the document verification channel. Now, when I talked about the verification of age proofs, when the age proofs of the bride and groom are checked, it automatically prevents child marriage, and it sort of increases age of marriage, average age of marriage of women, it's already been established in the literature that an increase in age of marriage reduces the likelihood of domestic violence. Secondly, in case that the groom is divorced, they need a proper legal proof of divorce before proceeding with the registration of the second marriage. And this prevents polygamy, which is a potential driver of domestic violence. And thirdly, having a registration certificate makes it easier for the woman to formally file a case of domestic violence, because the certificate is the legally identified document of the marital relationship. Because without the proof of marriage, the husband, what he can do is he can always deny the marital relationship. And in that case, it becomes the woman's responsibility to prove that. Otherwise, there is a chance that the case can become obsolete. And the second channel that we identify is the legal access channel, in the sense that legally registered marriage gives women access to legal protection and rights, such as custody of children and even spousal support in case of a separation. And this in turn increases the woman's bargaining power in the marital relationship, and it also increases the accountability on part of the husband and his incentive to maintain the marital relationship, which can potentially reduce domestic violence. Now let me talk briefly about the policy context. In India, there is no unified or centralized law that makes marriage registration mandatory. However, state governments, they can design their own policies in this regard. In this paper, we particularly study one such policy of the state of Bihar. Bihar is a northern state in India. And this policy was implemented in 2006. And according to this policy, every couple who are getting married within the geographical boundaries of the state Bihar, they're required to register their marriages within 30 days. And a failure to comply can result in monetary penalty. For methodology, we follow a very simple DID framework where our treatment state is Bihar, where the policy was implemented, and Jharkhand, which is the neighboring state, is our control state. And in equation 1, so to define the post dummy, we utilize the year of marriage variable. So post takes the value 1 if for women who got married after the mandatory registration policy, and the control group consists of women who got married before the policy, because this policy was not applicable for older marriages. It was only applicable for new marriages that was happening. We also include district fixed effect and year of marriage fixed effect. We cluster the standard errors at district level, and we check for parallel trends using an event study analysis. Data, we use National Family Health Survey, the 4th round. NFHS is basically the Indian version of DHS, and we restrict the sample to eligible women who were selected for the domestic violence module. And we also restrict the years of marriages in between 2002 to 2015. Why? Because until 2001, Bihar and Jharkhand, they used to be one unified state. And in 2001, that state got bifurcated, and Bihar and Jharkhand was, there are 2 states that were born. And why 2015? Because in 2016, Bihar banned the consumption of alcohol, which can have a very strong confounding impact on domestic violence. That is why we restrict our sample to years before that alcohol ban. This is a simple raw mean of treated and controlled states for one of the domestic violence outcomes that I have, which is any kind of domestic violence. It's a binary indicator. And we have it plotted for each years of marriage. And as you can see, for marriages happening after the policy, we can see a sharp decline in the domestic violence. Now, this is the main result table. We have 4 binary indicators of domestic violence as defined in the NFHs, the data we use. So what we find is that after the policy in treated state, that is in Bihar, the likelihood of emotional violence reduces by 8.7 percentage point. The likelihood of sexual violence reduces by 5.6 percentage point, and the same numbers for physical violence and any kind of violence were 10.8 percentage point and 11.6 percentage point. Now, the validity of these estimates depend on the validity of the parallel trends assumption, which we check using this event study plot. As you can see, there are no pre-policy significant pre-policy differences. There are no pre-policy trends, but after the policy, we can see significant differences emerge between treatment and control state. But if you look closely, all these differences are becoming statistically significant only after the year 2011. So we tried to understand what happened in the year 2011 that made all these differences significant. And we find that in 2011, Bihar passed this policy called Right to Public Services Act, in short RTPS, which was targeted to increase the reliability, transparency, efficiency, and accessibility of the public service delivery. Now, one might say that these differences are coming from the 2011 policy and not from the 2006 policy, which is not the case, because in 2011, 2011, our control state Jharkhand also implemented a similar policy called Jharkhand Right to Service Act. And both these policies followed the same framework that was laid out by the central government's Citizens' Right to Grievance Redress Bill. What this RTPS Act did is it curbed corruption in the process of marriage registration, and it smoothened the process of registration. We also include, in the main DID specification, we also include an additional interaction term, which is the interaction between treated and post-2011 dummy. And after we include this post-2011 interaction term, it becomes significant. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the first order impact in terms of the changes in the number of marriages registered. But unfortunately, in India, we don't have any sort of public data on the total number of marriages registered. So we filed for an RTI with Bihar government, and we asked for district-wise data on year-wise data on the number of marriages registered in all the districts. However, there are 2 districts for which we could obtain the data. The other districts sort of did not respond or said the data is unavailable. These 2 districts are Bhagalpur and Araria. Now we divide these year-wise data into 3 time intervals. One is pre-2006. The second time interval is post-2006, but pre-2011. And the third time interval is post-2011. Right now, we can see a sharp increase in number of marriages registered in between the first and second time interval, and there is another increase in between time interval 2 and 3. Now, let me talk about the mechanism. We study husbands' outcomes and women's outcomes separately. For husbands' outcomes, we find a reduction in polygamy. We find reductions in alcohol consumption reported by both the wife and the husband. And this is probably coming from the higher accountability on part of the husband. And higher accountability is also resulting in lower likelihood of the husband justifying domestic violence. And the second one is the women's outcomes. We first look at the age at marriage and child marriage. So age at marriage is increasing and the likelihood of child marriage is decreasing. So these 2 are probably the most direct impacts of the policy. And now, since the parents cannot marry their daughters off before legal age, the next option for them is to send them to school. Which is why we see an increase in education of women in terms of increased literacy and higher years of education, which translates into higher awareness measured by media exposure and lower likelihood of the wife justifying domestic violence. For robustness, we do DID with match sample using propensity score matching and entropy balancing. We do 3 falsification tests where we take 3 outcomes that are not at all likely to be impacted by the policy. For example, having a twin child, age at menarche, and month of birth. As expected, these coefficients are statistically insignificant. We also do a placebo-controlled state analysis using Chhattisgarh, which is another state nearby. Chhattisgarh as a control state. In Chhattisgarh, they made marriage registration mandatory in the same year, 2006, and they also had a similar policy similar to the RTPS in 2011. So if we use Chhattisgarh as a control state, then we should not see any significant impact, which is what we find here. And then we do placebo treatment year test. So instead of 2006, we take 2003 as treatment year, and we don't find any significant coefficients. And lastly, we exclude the bordering districts, the districts that sort of are located in the border area of Bihar and Jharkhand. Because in the bordering districts, the likelihood of interstate marriage is higher. So that means spillover between treatment and control states. So even after excluding the bordering states, our results are sort of holding. Then we try to rule out the contemporary policies. For example, one of our main concern was that the one policy called Chief Minister's Cycle Scheme, which was implemented in Bihar in the same year, 2006, where the state governments, they distributed free cycles to all girl students above grade 9. So what we do is we exclude women above grade 9 from our sample, and we restrict our sample to women who were never eligible for this policy. And we see that even for these particular subsample, the estimates are statistically significant. The next concern of ours was the scheme called Jivika. It came in Bihar in 2006, and it was basically focused on development of self-help groups in rural areas of Bihar. Now, if this policy had a confounding impact on our results, we would have seen higher higher impact in the rural areas, which is not the case. As we can see from panel B, there is no significant differences between rural and urban areas. If you look at the triple difference term, there's no significant impact. So this is also not a concern. Then is the Mukhyamantri Kanya Bivah Yojana, which is Chief Minister's girl child marriage scheme. Where the state government provided financial assistance for below poverty level households for their daughter's marriage. So if this had a confounding impact, we would have seen higher impacts of the policy for poor households. Again, this is not the case, as we don't see any significant differences between poor and non-poor households. Then I already talked about Bihar alcohol ban. We already dealt with that. Then is the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act of 2005. But this was a pan-India policy. So both the treatment state and the control state this policy was implemented in both the treatment and control state. So this is again not a problem. And then lastly, we sort of try to list a few policies, relevant policies in 2011, but we don't find anything any policy that can potentially impact domestic violence. For example, in Bihar, during 2011, Bihar mostly focused on industrial development, which is not likely to impact domestic violence. For Jharkhand, there were some Motor Vehicle Taxation Act, some acts on taxation, etc. So those are also probably not likely to impact domestic violence. So to conclude, in this paper, we find a negative impact of the mandatory marriage registration on domestic violence. We also find negative impacts on polygamy and child marriage. And we also show that, highlight that corruption in the public service delivery system can limit the effectiveness of a policy. And we finally conclude with a note to the policymakers that marriage registration should be made mandatory, but it should be combined with a broader strategy to reduce corruption in public service delivery. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Rikhia. Can you hear us? Rikhia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So we'll take a few questions and then you can answer them and we'll do 2 or 3 rounds.
Sure. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Make it convenient for you. Hi, Rikhia. Thanks for the presentation. I think this is great work. Just wondering if I think about these two policies together. So you had this legal mandatory registration, and you see the impacts only when that rights to services thing kick in. So should I conclude then it is that if you want to really, when you're looking at the impacts of right to services, so the focus could be on the Right to Services Act, and that only gets enabled if you have these mandatory registrations or legal infrastructure in place. So could that be another interpretation of what you're finding?
Yes, yes, I think it can be. It can be. You're right.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Rikhia. So I don't know if this data set includes geo coordinates, but it definitely sounds like it has smaller units than the larger state. So I think one thing I don't think you mentioned in the presentation, I didn't find in the paper, that could add a lot of value would be to see if the results look similar when you look at just areas that are closer to the border between the two states. So if there's a smaller number of districts that are it's more like getting closer to something like a discontinuity and differences estimate. And then the other thing, I think you mentioned partway through the presentation that the two states actually used to be one and had split pretty recently. I think that's something to foreground even earlier, because that helps, I think, to set up the idea that this is more that they might be moving otherwise on a similar track if it hadn't been for this particular piece of policy.
Right. Yeah, we do have geo coordinates, but we do not use this in that paper. We just look at the districts that share borders and we exclude those districts. We don't use geocoded. And as for the spatial discontinuity, it can be done. I'm not sure at this point. I have to think about it, but it can be done. Yeah. But we don't have like specific coordinates. We just have coordinates for the NFHS clusters. So yeah, I have to think about it.
So, Rikhia, that was fantastic. That was a great way to finish the first day. I was thinking throughout, there's an age-old question in this literature about why do men use violence? And I mean, just to caricature the debate, either it's a type or men are very strategic. And I was trying to interpret your results about what they're telling us about the existence of these two types. And so some of the evidence you showed us was reductions of alcohol consumption within marriages. So that suggests, there is a strategic element that men are responding to incentives as given by this piece of legislation. I was trying to think through what the evidence tells us about men as, of having this fixed type as well. So there I thought that, men who are most violent and will be violent irrespective of the incentives they face, they're the ones who tend to marry much younger or child brides. Those are being knocked out of the market. But then you showed some results on what's happening to marriage rates overall. Those aren't declining. We're not seeing those violent men not getting married at all. They're marrying somebody else as a result. I just wondered, it's more a comment whether you could say a little bit more about that extensive margin of entry into marriage as a result of the legal change.
Right. So what I understand from your question is that you are talking about if there is any selection happening in spouse selection. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, your results seem to suggest that you reduce the incidence of child marriage, and all else equal, if violence is driven by a type, you might expect that to be an important channel for which violence is reduced. But then I think you also showed that the incidence of marriage doesn't actually decline. In fact, maybe it increases. So if men are not marrying much younger women, who are they marrying instead? But maybe I misunderstood those results because you went through them a bit quickly. Just more on what happens on the extensive margin of marriage rates.
We don't have any data on the marriage rates because this sample is only restricted to ever married women. So all the women in my sample, they are married. So we are not really looking at the extensive margin, mostly looking at the intensive margin.
I was wondering, what are the rates in the comparison group of violence? Because if I understood the results correctly, it almost looked like they're being wiped out. Like your interactions were so large, the effect sizes. Can you say a bit about like what is the magnitude of the reduction in violence? Because like, if I remember correctly, it was about 15 percentage points decline in emotional violence. Is that just wiping out violence totally in these communities? Which I found a bit surprising. So the one where you interacted with 2011, the treated into post 2011. Yes, so here it almost looks like there is no emotional violence. Am I reading that correctly? It just seems surprising.
Yeah, I also had a bit conservation about this the magnitude of the coefficients, but um, I'm not sure how to interpret such large coefficients. But the way I understand this table is that um, so. So that the 2006 policy was not at all effective before 2011, and so the coefficient that we see here is a combined impact of the 2006 policy and the 2011 policy. So it's not just the 2006 policy, but I'm like, to be very honest, I don't know how to explain this such large coefficients. You're absolutely right in that regard.